Yo, just a meathead out here, straight out of Khyber, representing the casual obsession out here, you feel me? Listen. So I've been chilling out in Ebby. I just washed up on a ship. On the beach, some fool called Jeets is talking crazy. He's a trip. Thought I'd go hit the inn and grab some ale. Just kick it. Next I know Salimas is yelling, "Smite the wicked!" So this is how it goes round here. They want me fighting with no fear. Handing me a sword. Will I survive? It's not clear. Cause now they got me running down a crib so hating rests. These traps can slap scary, get back, but hey, where's the crest? I'm grabbing scrolls, doing puzzles, and even killing rats. And spiders from the floor? Yo, can't y'all get some cats? I'm guarding crystals from cultists. You know my weapons, they smoking. This Drexel hand is evoking. Suspicion spells are being spoken. This is my adventure, it's my journey. All my trainers out here got me learning. With some gold I paid a friend called Byron. Monsters come around here, that boy Wylin in Korthos. Yo man, who really runs this place around here anyway? Mayor? What? Coin lords? Huh. I guess if they're paying, I'm playing, you feel me? Shoot.
Hey, and welcome back to another episode of Fixer Upper. Tonight I have a special guest with me. I have Praetor. Go ahead and say hi, Praetor.
Hey everybody.
And tonight we're going to be talking about a First Life tank build. That's right, you heard that right. A First Life tank build, and we'll get into that in just a second. Just as a reminder to those who are joining this week, I am participating with Standing Stone Games and their efforts with Extra Life. If you're not familiar with Extra Life, it is a fundraising campaign for gamers to raise life for a charity of your choice. This year, the charity is the Children's Miracle Network Hospitals, looking to raise some money for the kids. So in lieu of subs or cheers or any other type of monetary compensation, I just ask that you consider sending $1 or $2 to the kids this year. So with that said, Praetor, man, you tell us a little bit about the tank life.
Yeah, so this is the main alt I play, and it's an alt I spent a fair bit of time on at Cap. It's a First Life Paladin tank designed to see how far a First Life tank can go. So basically the goal for this build is a few different things. One is to make Earth questing as easy as possible. So it's set up to make it pretty simple and straightforward on a First Life tank that's well built out to duo most R10s with solid DPS. It's also more precisely designed to push as high as we can in raids as with a first life tank. So the goal of this build is to see how many skulls we can throw on in most raids before a first life tank doesn't become viable, because at the very top end, tanks are probably the role that benefits the most from having extra past lives and Reaper points. But I've had a lot of fun with this version, and I think managed to get it to a point where I've made more progress with the first life tank than a lot of people would expect.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. And one of the things I love since I've been hosting this show is my expectations or thoughts around what's possible in DDO keep shifting. You know, my mind is blown. So for those at home, on this First Life tank build, some notable accomplishments is you've run every raid in the game on Reaper 1 or better. You did an R3 three-man completion of Killing Time. You tanked Strahd on R10 and on R7 as the only tank. You did a Project Nemesis on R4 as the solo tank, a Project Nemesis as R5 with the no raid gear version, Vision of Destruction on Reaper 6, Deathworm on Reaper 10, Stolen Power on Reaper 10. Wow. And you lasted in Killing Time on Reaper 1 for 30 minutes straight, just
Yeah, that's
self-healing.
mostly just a sustainability benchmark there, because it's a fun sustainability benchmark.
So the first thing that happens whenever I bring up to a guildie or a friend and I'm like, hey, I really want somebody to make an alt. That way if we're on the TR cycle, we can still raid. Everybody says, oh, that's cool. I'll make a healer. Nobody says, "Oh, you know what I should do? I should make a first life tank." Because I think the perception out there is, hey, if you're going to tank, you need at a bare minimum all the epic past lives. You're going to need a lot of the heroic past lives just for the defenses, just to like enter the threshold of the hit points that you need. But you're saying no, no, you can get it done on a first lifer for most of the content.
Yeah, so the numbers I'm most familiar with are on a version of this build with the best gear in the game as far as I can tell. So full raid gear. It's actually not an LGS set, Legendary Green Steel set, which takes a ton of farming because I don't think Legendary Green Steel is optimal on a Paladin. But other than that, it's very good gear and about 50 Reaper points, and technically a second life. But that's the version I play most often. On that version, I sit just over 7,000 HP buffed when I step into Reaper, but with only long-term buffs and around 550 POR when I step in and hit block. So those aren't like the same numbers that you'd get on a Uber comp endgame grade tank, but they're pretty solid numbers in terms of most content people do.
That's awesome. And when I do post this build, I'm gonna post. Is it okay if I share your link that you sent me tonight?
Of course, yeah, that doc's public.
So for anybody who wants to follow along, if you're watching the stream, I just posted that now. But I'm gonna switch over to the DDO builder. I'm hoping you'll help me flesh this out as we go. Um, Normally, I kick it off with talking about your race choice. So I see you went dwarf. Can you walk us through that choice?
Yeah, so dwarf here is for three different reasons. One, dwarf is a lot of HP. It's 4 constitution, given the points I put in the racial tree, and it's also 30 flat HP from the racial tree. This build runs a 1.7 total HP scaler, which means that 30 HP turns into about 51 HP, and the 4 constitution turns into 109 HP. So just getting started, we end up with about 160 extra HP over, say, a human, which is a pretty nice start on the tank. And then on top of that, and the big deal with Dwarf is you get bubbles, Radiant Force Field. So this build, with the configuration I run, gets 4 Radiant Force Fields per rest, which means I get basically 3 minutes of taking 25% less damage, or 3 minutes of giving somebody else 25% less damage. So this is both huge for sustainability and tougher content, and also, say, keeping a healer up in when they're at risk of getting one.
Yeah, that's great. And how do you decide when you use that as a self buff versus you're gonna put it on somebody else?
In practice, if I'm not short manning, it's probably like if I'm not doing a specific short man, it probably is always going to go on myself whenever I feel like I'm taking too much damage, just because typically in a full party, it's it's either easy enough content that I'm not using it regularly. So for Legendary Herd or an O1 Raid Train, I in practice don't end up using it that much, or because this is a first life tank, you end up wanting it for yourself to add some more survivability and take the pressure off a healer. The exception is in short man, so like the killing time short man I talked about earlier, I use that bubble pretty heavily on the healer to keep them up whenever trash spawned. Because in situations like that, if the healer dies, the raids are wipe immediately. So there are some situations in which it's used to mitigate random damage on the party. More often, it'll just be used on you. In R10s, which is the probably most common place I end up using it, it's really nice if you're in a party without healing to be able to pop Force Field and maybe even a Discorporation quickly or Hood of Unrest if you're trying to tank more than one Doom at once without solid healing, because that lets you hold the Doom for a lot longer while the DPS smelts it.
Yeah, and we'll save that for the end, but at the end I kind of want to save a little bit of time to talk about things that might not be on the character sheet that you think are important for tanks to know or pick up extra gear pieces, like the hood you just mentioned.
Yeah.
So so because it's a paladin, alignment's a no-brainer. You're going lawful, you're going good, right?
Yep.
And I didn't notice. Is there a tome for this version of the build?
So there are two versions I have in the dock. The more fully fleshed out version, I use +8 con, which is really the only term you want. It's not necessary. You can technically do it without it. You hit all the stat prereqs, but it would be really nice for you to have +8 con tome because you know that's an extra 200 and something HP that it would be unfortunate to go without. You basically want whatever your biggest tome is in con. Your secondary tome barely matters. technically you can put it in int or strength are both not terrible choices. Sorry, what am I saying? Your secondary tome should always be in charisma. Your tertiary tome is the one that really doesn't matter. So if you have three tomes for whatever reason, the third anything after charisma and constitution don't really matter, but charisma is really important for intimidate and your saves, and constitution is important for your HP.
And then obviously you're putting all your level up straight into Constitution as well. For a tank, the skill breakdown is pretty important too, right? So can you walk us through your skill choices here?
Yeah, so there are a few, depending on whether you have an int tome or not, changes this very slightly, and depending on your preference, also changes this very slightly. The important things you're going to want are Intimidate 23, which is pretty much hard to ignore. On a first lifer, you actually do need all those points of Intimidate to set at a reasonable target, so max out your Intimidate always. Um, then the other skills you want to consider are Tumble, Heal, Use Magic Device, maybe Concentration, maybe Balance. So going through those, Tumble, 1 point is fine, but you definitely want at least 1 point so you can tumble. If you have spare points, say you have a +8 in tome lying around, it wouldn't be a bad idea to max tumble, so you get an extra tumble charge, except it doesn't work in heavy armor right now. So, because it's not entirely clear if that's working as intended, if that gets fixed at some point in the future, maxing tumble isn't a bad idea, otherwise you just want 1 point in tumble. Heal is positive spell power. Positive spell power is very good. Anything below 6 or so, self-healing is a really big deal on this build, and positive spell power is quite good. So put as much into heal as you can spare. Use Magic Device is an interesting one, because technically if you put all of your points into Use Magic Device, you'll end up with way more Use Magic Device than it looks like you need. So you'll end up between 50 or 60 generally, which is significantly more than you need. You only need 44 minus 1 because your minimal roll is a 1, so 43 for a Greater Restoration score. However, if you're casting Greater Restoration, that means you have negative level. And if you have negative level, that means you have lower skill check than your full modifier. So you actually want excess UMD. So if you have excess UMD, excess points, UMD is a good investment. Concentration, this build runs quicken, so concentration is purely for the option to um, cast scrolls. And in combat, again, this is mostly for restoration intent, so scrolls and fire shield too. So if you have an int tome, I would max Intimidate, UMD, Heal, and Concentration, and throw any extra points into Tumble. If you don't have an int tome, I would just max Intimidate, go 1 Tumble, 1 UMD, and put the rest into Heal.
Nice. Okay. That's great to understand. Yeah. I don't think I would have picked up that having a UMD above what is actually needed is important on a tank, but I appreciate you breaking that down. So I think I got some of the feat placements wrong, so you're gonna have to fix this with me if you don't mind. Kind of walk us through your feats by level. I think a lot of them make sense and are pretty standard, but I wasn't able to fit in the same number of toughnesses that you had. So maybe walk me through where I went wrong here.
Sorry, I might need to take a look. Let me see. Oh, you have Epic Destiny feats unfilled. Those are toughnesses, I think. Um, I believe that's correct. Basically, I actually don't have I didn't set up these feats for leveling because I don't level as this build. If I play it, I level as something else and hurt into it as at cap because it's incredibly annoying to level as. So I really, when I'm hurting into it as cap, I just take all the non-toughness feats I know I want, and then I let any feats I have free I start as toughness. This, I believe, if I remember right, gives me 3 toughness if I'm running with combat expertise, or 4 toughness without combat expertise. 3 toughness if I'm running with 1 of combat expertise and epic fortitude, 4 toughness if I'm running with neither, 2 toughness if I'm running with both. So going through the feat choices, because I think that's really more insightful, you just fill in however many toughness you can. The shield mastery line is a no-brainer. It's a ton of PRR. You really want that. Combat expertise is actually kind of an interesting choice here because it comes with a trade-off of having to have 13 int. If you have an int tome, this is easy, it's totally fine, and then it's a feat for about 25 to 30 armor class, which is pretty good in Reapers. This build doesn't get a high enough armor class to be usable in most raids, because you really need to hit well over 500 armor class to be usable in most raids. In a first life build, to me, that comes with two big trade-offs in terms of how much HP you can get and also just whether you can actually get up there without epic pass size, for instance. So uh, I can see if you're not doing Reapers, so if you're building just for raiding, and you're building on a build without Tome, I would strongly consider dropping combat expertise. However, if you plan to be running Reapers, which you probably do, given that you really want some Reaper points in this build, combat expertise is a pretty solid choice because 25 to 30 extra AC for a feat is very good. Quicken Spell is a near mandatory feat because it means you can cast Resurrection in combat, which is huge, as well as it lets you cast all of your healing spells in combat, which is also a really big deal. Because it means they won't be interrupted, and it means you can spend more time blocking and less time slowed down casting spells. Um, Most of the other feats are pretty straightforward. You want Least Dragon Mark of Warding because it gives you bubbles from Dwarf, which is the damage reduction I was talking about earlier. You want epic damage reduction because it's better than another toughness. Roughly, we can think about each one PRR as being approximately equivalent to 10 HP in terms of incoming physical damage. That's not exact, but if you do out the math, that's about where it comes to. So 10 PRR is worth about 100 HP, which is more than the 54 or 55 you get from a toughness. Um, Shield deflection would be optional, except it would be bad, not just optional. Except, sorry, bulwark of defense would be bad and not just optional. Except in Yielding Sentinel, it gives you, I believe, 15 extra PR if you take Bulwark of Defense. Again, 15 PR for a feat is quite good, so we're taking it. And Shield Deflection is useful because it means that you take significantly less elemental damage while blocking, 40% less with a Tower Shield, which this build runs, which is a big deal in raids where a lot of the incoming damage is an elemental dot, which is true in Farm, Skellies, and KT, as well as useful in a lot of other raids like the second fight in Hunt. So overall, that's a pretty solid feat. Legendary Toughness is too much HP to ignore. Sign of Celestia is also too much HP to ignore. Um, and then the only other interesting feat choice is Epic Fortitude, which is optional, but highly recommended if you're going to be doing any raid where the boss casts Disintegrate. We can augment Ultimatum to get around Essence of Ultimatum to get around Petrification, which is the other thing that's relevant, unless you're running a no raid gear version. But you really don't want to be disintegrated and roll a 1, because even if though you have plenty of fort to make your save most of the time, if you roll a 1, you'll be taking upwards of 8,000 damage sometimes, and it's untyped, so you have a very small amount you can do to mitigate it. So Epic Fortitude is a good choice in general. But it is optional, and if you're doing mostly questing or lower difficulty raiding, I would consider dropping it. In terms of the Paladin special feat, the main choice here is Sovereign Host because it gives you a full heal that comes with a death penalty cleanse. This is super useful because in raiding, the death penalty cleanse is very nice. Being able to get back to full HP immediately or get a healer back to full HP is very useful. And the full heal is great for questing because it means that you can get your own HP total up if you're in a sticky situation without needing to rely on anybody else in your party. Um, the other good options here are Landra, which is another big heal that comes with a buff but doesn't come with a death penalty cleanse, or Vol, which is just a temporary buff that increases your defensiveness. I personally like Sovereign Host the most.
Yeah, I remember at one point for Luck of Aladra, because I play a lot of different cleric builds. Luck of Aladra wasn't actually giving the full heal in Reaper before, so I don't know if they fixed that yet or not.
Yeah, I don't know. I know I just run Sovereign Host, and it's a 2-tick heal for I think 10,000 before heal amp both times or something, which comes out to about 2 to 3,000 in R10 if I remember right, and a full heal in basically anything beneath that. So it's a huge heal.
And you said you would consider Blood of All as well?
Yeah, technically it's the most defensive one. It's just a button that gives you slightly more constitution and PRR for about almost a minute, I want to say. I personally like the heal better, but if you want to have more of a another longer duration buff instead of a one shot heal, Vol is very good too.
That's great. Yeah, so I think as a paladin, you get a religious lore feat per level, so it should last almost two and a
You
half
do.
minutes for you.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow. That's cool.
Yeah, so, and it looks like it's giving you 10 MRR too. Oh no, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
PR and MRR are 20 each because it's equal to the number of religious lore feats. So,
Yeah.
but
It's a solid defensive clicky. I just like the flexibility of the heal and the death penalty cleanse more.
all right, great. Well, let's go ahead and hop into the enhancements for the build. And we already talked a little bit about Dwarf, so you're picking up the con. You took that Lesser Dragon Mark of Warding, and that's what unlocks this path for you. You gain some additional Dragon Mark uses. You get a nice spell resistance clicky. Now, 12 plus 1 per caster level. I think that works out does it actually max at 20 for you?
I believe it actually maxes at 30. It's 32 total, if I remember right. The only time I've ever seen spell resistance be relevant is when I swap into my Nove gear set, because then I get an extra insightful bonus from my cloak. And even then it's barely relevant. You end up at 60 something when you hit all of your clickies, which isn't quite enough to be relevant in most raids, to be no fail in most raids, and most raids don't have a ton of spell resistance yes effects that are super impactful that aren't covered by your saves. So it's not something I really notice, but it is something you do get.
And you also get the Greater Dragon Mark of Warding, which is, of course, the Radiant Force Field clicky. Now, if you gain access to the Radiant Force Field spell, this is actually a separate cooldown for this ability, which is quite nice as well.
Yeah. One nice thing to notice here that's not obvious and is very minor is that actually Least Dragon Mark of Warding is a useful ability. It is neutralize poison, which Paladin doesn't get access to in an easy way. You have to spend a spell slot on it otherwise. And which is kind of cool because neutralize poison is something that is sometimes relevant in quests and raids that is I don't normally carry on my build, so I realized a few months ago that I was getting that from Least Dragon Mark, and that's useful.
So walk us through the other trees that you have here, maybe starting with Vanguard.
Yeah, so Vanguard is the easiest to understand. 2-second deflect is an incredibly powerful ability. It means every 2 seconds you can ignore an arrow that would have otherwise hit you. This comes, I believe, last, meaning that if your arrow wouldn't have hit you, it doesn't proc your deflect. So basically, it's truly every 2 seconds you get to ignore one arrow hit that otherwise would have hit you. In certain raids, this is basically mandatory. So in Project Nemesis, for instance, this lets you tank Urk and ignore his slaying arrows because he doesn't fire often enough to get through your once every 2 seconds protection. The only time you have to worry about that is if Gish starts throwing daggers at you too. But that's just something you have to manage. With that said, you really want the 2-second deflect because it means that you don't have to worry about getting one shot by Arc in PN most of the time. In terms of quests, this also lets you ignore a lot of archers since archers and quests don't fire very quickly. So this is just a really, really strong ability and actually one of the best parts about a fighter or paladin tank. I would always go 8 points in Vanguard for that. That's Vanguard. The other easy tree to explain is Sacred Defender. The Sacred Defender capstone is not as good as the Praetor capstone. It is still very, very strong. It comes with 250 unconsciousness range, some extra constitution, some extra pure and MR, I think, and a turn undead heal ability that is technically useful, even though it's not as useful because that healing is reduced by the Reaper penalty. So in higher skulls, it will not do very much. It still is something to occasionally get you unconscious, and in general, we just want to be spending 41 points here because we're a Paladin tank, so we want to be spending 41 points in the Paladin tank tree. Sacred Defender is actually a really good tree. You can easily spend up to like 54 points before you start taking stuff that's bad. Um, I tend to find that either 41 or 44 is best based on whether or not you take that 3-point action boost. I don't have it on in this configuration, but I probably should. Um, it's really just up to you whether you want 6 flat PRR or a defense boost for 15 PRR and some armor and 15 armor class and 15 MR. So that's Sacred Defender. The only big thing to note is that I don't take the spell resistance bonuses or the bonuses to saves when I don't have to, because they're not very good in comparison to the rest of the tree, and I don't take the armor class bonuses when I don't have the points to. So this build is not an armor class first build, it's an armor class like fourth build, for the same reasons I explained earlier, which is that armor class isn't super useful in raids with the levels I can get it to. Which means I don't take the tier 5 armor class bonus because I just don't have enough points to do that. The one other thing to note is that center ability in tier 5, you only want to take the first rank. The second and third rank are very bad. The first rank is very good because it's 100 flat HP. But the second and third rank are, I believe, one armor class, one saving throw, and one spell resistance, which is far worse than 100 flat HP. So you basically just want to take that first point there. Yeah. Then outside of those trees, so 14 in Dwarf to get our bubbles, 8 in Vanguard to get our deflect, then we go 41 Sacred Defender. That puts us at, what is that? A total of 63 points spent, I think. We don't have much more than 80 points in this build. Depends on which universal and racial tomes you have. I pulled a +2 racial tome on this character, so I have, I think, 83 total points to spend. Um, but the other points are going in falconry because sprint boost is very strong. Sprint boost gets you both the ability to keep up with putties in quests and also the ability to kite stuff very well in raids, which is a very strong ability. And falconry is in general a very points efficient tree. The tier 1 has both PR and also heal amp, both of which are very high value stats. So we pick up all of the goodies from falconry. Sprint boost locks us into 8 HP, 8 AP at least in falconry. Completing the heal amp and the constitution core gets us to 10 already, at which point quality HP is only 2 additional points. This is way cheaper than it is in Dwarf. The 5% quality HP in Dwarf costs me a total of, I think, either 6 or 9 points by the time I take all the prerequisites. So it's just more efficient to take it in Falconry than Dwarf, even though I have plenty of points in Dwarf to unlock the prerequisites to take quality HP in Dwarf. It also, spending 2 points here is more efficient than spending a feat, which is what I would have to do if I wanted to use my Epic Destiny Unyielding Sentinel to get that 5% quality HP by taking the Deific Warding. So this happens to be the best place to pick up quality HP, and at that point you may as well take that third core for an extra 3 PR, some heal amp, and a bunch of other stuff for cheaper than you would get it anywhere else. So overall at this point was 13 in falconry, which puts us up to, I think, a total of 75 spent. And then with a remaining 7 or 8 points, we put in VKF because it turns out that 6 PR, 6 MR, and negative energy absorb are better than basically anything else we can get with 7 points. Um, the one other thing to consider is if you are using a non-standard Epic Destiny layout where you get mental toughness for some reason, you can put those into Fade Dark Illusionist to get 10 PR and MR instead of only 6 by using Shield and a Night Shield clicky, both of which you can get for long durations. The You've Got My Back enchantment in Tier 2. It's a cool trick. I don't use it because my Epic Destiny layout doesn't let me, which is unfortunate. So yeah, that's heroic HP.
Yeah, that's great. So help me out here. If somebody has the racial points for dwarf, now with Myth Janor you can get the +3 racial tome, and I believe you can max out at 18 racial points. How would you spend differently if you had all the racial pass lives?
So the first easy grabs would be definitely 3 extra into Sacred for that action boost and the PR in Core 1. I would probably actually go to 6 extra in Sacred and grab the AC in Tier 5 too, because those are all really easy choices that just get you more good stats. Um, then you can go in a few different ways. So some people really like energy drain immunity on a tank. That it alleviates all the concerns with greater restoration I was talking about earlier. If you want to do that, then you want to go up to tier 4 Vistani Knife Fighter. So that's going to require a fair number of points, and I think you can actually only get 3 extra points into Sacred Defender if you do that. If you're okay with going without that, then I'd only go up to tier 3 in Vistani Knife Fighter and put the remainder of the points into Fade Dark Illusionist and either take take the magical training feat or either take the magical training feat or modify your Epic Destiny layout to accommodate for that. We can talk about how I would do that for different situations later on. Um, the other thing to consider is that Dwarf comes with some more maximum dexterity bonuses for tower shields, which is kind of a big deal because it lets you get extra dodge. So right now this build runs 7 dodge, 4 based on a tower shield, plus 3 maximum dexterity bonus from Sacred Defender. If you had enough points to throw those into Dwarf, then that would go up to, I believe, 10 from Dwarf, so which is 3% extra dodge, which is a significant bonus. So if you have the room, definitely take those extra points in Dwarf. Uh, that would be the immediate changes I would make. Anything beyond that would probably require some additional tuning. Picking up more falconry is also potentially an interesting idea, although I don't know if I'd do it. I think VKF is probably the big one that look, VKF, Sacred Defender, and Dwarf are probably the 3 big ones that I'd spend extra points in.
Okay, great. Let's go ahead and let's look at destinies and what we're doing here.
Yeah. So the big decisions we want to make on Destinies, obviously we want Unyielding Sentinel a bunch. The reason why we want Unyielding Sentinel a bunch is because the Unyielding Sentinel is by far the best tier 5 in the game for tanks. It comes with the 10k HP Epic Moment, which is just a button that heals you to full basically and gives you 10,000 HP, temporary HP, which is basically non-negotiable for tanks. Having that button to get you out of a bad situation is very important. The other good tier 5 bonuses here are 20% bonus to insightful HP. This is another huge bonus. 20% HP scaler is approximately 700 flat HP. So anything but tier 5 macro tech would just lose 7,000 flat HP. Sorry, 700, not 7,000 flat HP, which would be pretty bad. I don't take Resurrection in tier 5. That doesn't look, that because Paladin doesn't need a Resurrection clicky. So we don't need that one. We only spend a total of, I think, 38 or 39 here, depending on our setup. Um, Lay on Hands is an interesting ability because you definitely want the ability that lets you lay on hands scale for Constitution and with your character level instead of Charisma. That makes your lay on hands hit significantly harder. So that's in tier 3, I believe. Um, with that enhancement, most of my lay on hands on myself hit for around 6,000 in town, which means that in anything below basically a 9 or a 10, they're a useful heal for myself, and they're a great heal for other members of my party to top them off. Lay on hands is a very useful ability because it is a very quick heal point, meaning basically when I hit the lay on hands button, the healing comes very quickly thereafter. So there isn't a lot of delay, there's no animation, none of that annoying stuff. The tier 5 is a weird ability though, because what it does is it makes your lay on hands an AoE. It also says it makes them scale better. It doesn't. It's currently bugged to not scale with spell power or melee power. That's not a benefit of the tier 5. However, the tier 5 comes with a hidden effect, which is that it also changes the targeting of your lay on hands and makes it a little less reliable and a little worse. So technically, if you're looking to play this build to the most, like in the hardest content possible, I wouldn't take this tier 5 ability. However, if you're looking to play this build for R1 raid trains, I would absolutely take this ability, because what this button means is that you have 14 charges, 12 to 14 charges, of a button that will heal every melee in the raid to full HP around you if you're clustered around the boss. That's a really useful ability to have, especially if you have a pug healer who might not be as on top of healing the whole raid as a push raid healer might be. So because of that, this is a really useful ability to have because it lets you, without thinking a lot, basically just substitute for heals along with the Crusade ability in the raid for all the melees. You can go either way on that one. The rest of the tier 5s are pretty self-explanatory. In the rest of the tree, one of the best changes SSG has made recently is making Further Boom and Knight's Challenge come as 2 separate abilities with a shared cooldown, rather than putting them together. For people who aren't familiar, this is a taunt and an AoE taunt. And the AoE taunt comes with a stun, which means for questing, it's an AoE stun that also grabs the aggro of everything. This is a really, really useful ability for Urtans because whenever there's a pack of stuff, you can taunt it and grab its aggro and stun it. However, for raids, it has a shorter range and doesn't let you split targets off from other targets. So for instance, if you were in Project Nemesis with two tanks, and you wanted to have Gish on one tank and Brutus on the other tank, this can be somewhat challenging if neither tank had a non-upgraded Throw the Boom before this change, because it meant that if either tank was to use either Intimidate or their taunt, they would grab both bosses at once. So the change of splitting these off is incredibly useful because it means you can bring both, so you can split stuff or grab it at long range when you want, but you can also AoE stun stuff when you want, which is also some of the time. Great change. So you want to grab both of these. Most of the other changes, things you grab are pretty self-explanatory. You grab all the flat HP, you grab Renewal, because Renewal is an incredibly strong healing ability that lets you sleep through Legendary Herd raids, because you can keep Renewal ticking on yourself to heal to full basically every 2 seconds, and also keep your party up while using very little SP. The Mantle is very good. It's a bunch of extra HP. It's that 20% insightful HP I was talking about earlier. And the Intimidate in Tier 1 is quite strong if you need it to get your Intimidate up. It's a good source of Intimidate. Same for the Fortification in Tier 1. Depending on your gear set, you might need one or either of those. The Epic Strike is kind of your choice. I tend to run 3 Epic Strikes. I run this Epic Strike, the LD Epic Strike, and the DC Epic Strike. I run all of them. Basically, the reason for that is because the Unyielding Sentinel Epic Strike, while good, is not excellent, in that one strike is about 500 HP, temp HP, 600 temp HP with 50% uptime. One strike, and the other strike is technically AoE cleave that slows your whatever you hit and also gives you a buff for PR and MRR. This buff would be very strong if you could consistently land it. Unfortunately, my attack bonus at cap on this build is, I believe, 46 last time I checked, which is hilariously low, meaning that you're never actually going to be landing this strike and keeping it up. SSG has made some changes to help this. They've given a plus 30 to hit. It still isn't quite enough for me on a first life tank to be able to consistently land it. On more completionist tank, you could definitely consider running this full time, and if you can keep these stacks up, it becomes by far the best epic strike. I can't, so I need other options. I tend to run the HP strike here because of that, especially because there was a change about 6 to 8 months ago, where if you had Legendary Green Steel Salt or Identity Crisis on a weapon, before that, if you hit Celestial Mandate with that weapon, every enemy you hit would be hit with Salt. This is quite strong because it meant that you could basically salt, meaning slow down by 90%, a whole pack of them up. You now cannot do that. It has an internal cooldown, so you can only salt one thing at a time, which makes this a lot worse and no better for that purpose than just swinging your weapon at things. So I like the HP strike here because it lets you get some extra temp HP, but when that's not useful, you also definitely want the DC and LD epic strikes. The LD one is mainly for mobility. It's a pseudo dash, it's a charge, and the DC one is for AoE heal, which is very good, especially in lower difficulty content where you want to not worry so much about your party's health, and being able to tick them for 500 to 1k HP every 3 seconds is a really good ability because it means that nobody really has to worry about healing. So yeah, that's Unyielding Sentinel. If we go outside of Unyielding Sentinel, my second epic destiny is almost always going to be Legendary Dreadnought, because Legendary Dreadnought comes with 15 PRR in Core 3, which is a ton of PRR. So you always are going to want that on a tank, pretty much. The other abilities it comes with that are useful is, so any melee Epic Destiny now gets 25 flat HP a core, which is a really big advantage. Because remember, that's scaled by your 1.7 HP scaler. So the 75 HP you get here is almost, it's like 130 HP per Epic Destiny that's a melee Epic Destiny.
So do me a favor. I didn't have a chance to fill this one out. Can you walk me through it from the bottom up?
Yeah, so we want our first core. Then I take the Epic Strike 1 point. And then you want all 3 points of, I believe that's Healing Amp. It's either Healing Amp or it's HP in Tier 1. So take all 3 points of that HP. Yeah, that one. Because 30 extra maximum hit points is a full toughness feat. So we're basically getting a full feat for the price of 3 Epic Destiny points, which is good. Um, Another core, because that next core is another 25 flat HP. Then we take Heal Amp, because Heal Amp is a great stat to have on a tank. It makes your healer not hit you, which is always a great goal. If the more Heal Amp you have, the better everybody's happier. Um, And then this puts us in an interesting spot because we have 9 points spent once we've spent those points, and we really want to have 10 points spent because 10 points spent is what gives us the ability to take that third core, which gives us that extra 15 PR on top of the 25 HP. So you have a few different options here. The easiest thing you can do is just throw a point into a push through the line, which gives you an extra +1 well-rounded whenever you're action boosting. It's in tier 1, I think. But you can also take +1 action boost per rest. If you're taking the defense boost, I would take +1 action boost per rest. If you're not, I would take push for the line. It's not a huge deal either way. One extra sprint boost to rest is nice. It's not game changing. One extra ability score while you're in sprint boost is nice. It's not game changing. And then you just take that third core. Yeah, so that's Legendary Dreadnought, and that's going to be a very standard point allocation on tanks, just because the amount of defensive stats you get from that are way more than any other destiny, basically. Um, then your third destiny is kind of a flex choice. So you can go for either Divine Crusader, which is my favorite, which gets you the most stats and some nice AoE healing, which is very convenient. The other big option is Fury of the Wild. So if you have full epic destiny points, so at least I think 73 or 74 is a critical threshold. I think you can go up to 75 now. You really, really want Fury of the Wild. And the reason why is because there are two tier 4 enchantments in Fury of the Wild that make it excellent for tanks. One says basically whenever you use a primal scream charge, you take 15% less damage for the next is it 5 seconds? I think it's 5 seconds. Um, it's the one all the way to the right in tier 4. All the way to the right, I think. Yeah, that one. Unquenchable Rage. You take 15% less damage for 5 seconds after you consume a Rage Charge or use Primal Scream. So basically, on a tank, taking 15% less damage whenever you click a button is very, very strong. It's an ability that says I believe the cooldown of Primal Scream is 30 seconds. So it basically says whenever a boss is using a telegraph special attack or something gets rough, you just take 15% less damage from it. So if you have the Epic Destiny points to get that, you should get that. It's one of the best abilities in the game for tanks. On a first lifer, you don't, without sacrificing Legendary Dreadnought, which gives which you can't really afford to do. So instead, we take Divine Crusader as one option. Fury of the Wild is actually one option because getting Primal Scream is nice. If somebody else in your group can help you with Primal Scream, then it's not a great choice, but also that's kind of inconvenient. And if you're not in an organized group, you probably won't be organized enough to have somebody helping you with Primal Scream every 5 minutes. And there are some other cool options. The coolest of them is Exalted Angel. Specifically, if you're questing, wings are, in my opinion, the strongest ability in DDO for questing, because they let you use movement in combat effectively. So the big deal here is that if you are taking a Doom Reaper, which is the scariest situation you will be in most R10s, especially if there's more than one Doom Reaper and you have limited DPS in the party, Exalted Angel Wings let you get away from the Doom Reaper, so the Doom Reaper physically cannot hit you. This is very important because it means that if you are chained by the Doom Reaper, at least as of fairly recently, you can still run away by hitting Wings. So if you can get this ability, you probably should. Unfortunately, for raids, Exalted Angel is kind of terrible. It comes with very few defensive stats. The Epic Strike is fine, but not great. The Mantle would be very strong for self-healing, but you can't really afford to give up the 700 HP from the Unyielding Sentinel Mantle, along with 30% or 20% Elemental Absorbs. So, Exalted Angel is awkward for raids, but very, very good for quests. If you take Exalted Angel, I would absolutely swap um, that into Fadak Illusionist to recover some of those stats from the Sunny Knife Fighter in the heroic trees, because Exalted Angel does give you magical training. The other thing you can consider is Macro Technic. Macro Technic also gives you magical training and some defensive stats, but not as many. But it comes with the upside of Radiant Prism, which is kind of a cool ability that basically lets you lock one annoying thing away for 8 seconds so that you don't have to worry about it. I think it's not as good as Exalted Angel, but it's a cool thing to consider. The other neat thing with Macro Technic that you consider is that if you want to run this as a Blade Forge, which is something you can consider because Blade Forge comes with slashing damage reduction, which is nice in some raids. The Macro Technic Epic Strike is a huge self-heal. So the Repair Burst is a very, very good self-heal ability for Macro Technic, and if you're running a Blade Forge, I'd probably run it instead of DC, just because the Epic Strike that's a Repair Burst is a much better self-heal than anything that you can get if you're not a robot. The disadvantage of being Blade Forged is you need to concentrate a lot on heal amp, or your party healers are going to really hate you, which unless you're running an organized party is bad. Um, so yeah, that's another option to consider.
So one quick question for you, because one of the big benefits of running a barbarian tank is their damage reduction, right? So for being in the mantle of the sentinel, you're getting some positive heal amp, and then in the tier 5, you're also getting that 20% to your hit points.
Yeah.
And in Macro Technic, if you had that mantle active, it gives you a 10% absorption to all the physical damage. Do you think that that's a good trade-off, or no, and why?
So unfortunately, if I remember right, if you want to upgrade the Macro Technic uh mantle upgrade to give you what is it, 15% instead, you need to wield a Runa. For gearing considerations, as we'll see, and because the shield mastery line is really good, you don't want to be wielding a Runa. So that's capped at 10%, you can't get that 15% tier. Because of this, you only get 10%, and if you want the 10% insightful HP, which you need to make up for the fact that you're um if you want 20% insightful HP out of Macrotech, you also need to be in a Runa, even if you go tier 5 Macrotech. So the awkward bit there is that if you are trying to get that 10% physical absorption, you give up 10% HP, and you give up your 10k HP moment, and you give up a lot of elemental absorb. So in essence, it can't be good for your effective HP because you're only gaining 10% physical absorb and you're losing 10% HP and other stuff. It turns out that that's not exactly how that works out because it's going from a 1.7 mod to a 1.6 scalar mod, which is like a 6% loss, not a 10% loss, so it technically is an upgrade against physical damage, but having to swap your tier 5 out of Unyielding Sentinel to pick up at least 10% of that HP basically means that sorry, you can still run Unyielding Sentinel tier 5 if you want to keep 10% of the HP. I don't like that trade-off because it means you lose a ton of magic absorb, which is awkward because a lot of newer raids actually rely on magic absorb pretty heavily. So Skellies and Fires of a Morgrave, which are two of the biggest incoming damage raids, both you really want that extra magic absorb. And also, I just think a lot of being in Macrotech is more awkward. If I was gearing for like Lord of Blades push, I would probably end up considering going Macrotech because that would get me slashing damage reduction, Macrotech damage reduction. Lord of Blades is basically a pure physical damage raid. So that'd get me almost, I think, 20% physical damage reduction. It would just come at a huge cost to my magic damage, which I wouldn't care about for Lord of Blades. In general, though, I think the trade-off of giving up 10% insightful HP for 10% physical damage reduction isn't a great one because you're like roughly flat on physical HP and you lose a lot of other perks.
Yeah, I was thinking more along the lines of if this is the tertiary tree, like if you did this instead of Divine Crusader, um, I was just wondering if you would pick that up just so you could toggle between the two mantles depending on what you're running.
Yeah, that could be cool to play around with. As a tertiary tree, it really is only 10% absorb, and toggling that on will lose me as either 20 or 30% elemental absorb and also 10% HP. So like I'm very marginally up on physical HP and I'm way down on magical HP, so I'd really only ever toggle it on if I was in a pure physical raid. Um, it's something to consider. I don't know if I I'd have to play around with it some.
So walk me through Divine Crusader. Let's assume that's the tree. Let's build that from the ground up.
Yeah. So, like I said, we want a Crusade Epic Strike, and we want all three ranks of that because Crusade is great. That's half the reason we're under tree. The cores of Divine Crusader are very stat heavy. If you hover over the second core, I forget what it gives you, but I think it's 5 heal amp. Yeah, no. It's just saving throws. The third core is the one that has heal amp, I think. Um, yes, the third one has PR and heal amp and armor class. So that's a very strong core. So again, we want to make sure we're spending at least 11 to get that 25 HP, that pure, that heal amp, all of that stuff. So to do that, we take 3 points of Crusade. Then we want to spend exactly 1 more point in tier 1. We would kind of like to take heal on Smite, and heal on Smite is an option, but that costs 2 points, not 1 point, which is going to mean we get 2 fewer PR and ammo. I don't love that trade-off, so I just grab 1 point of hit and damage, which is fine. Then in tier 2, we have 2 abilities we would like to take. One of them gives us extra PR and ammo, one of them gives us extra fort and HP. These are very similar in terms of how cost-effective they are. Um, the PR and MR is better in terms of stats, but if you have enough fort, but depending on your gear set, you may or may not have enough fort. You will have enough fort if you are taking the tier 1 in Unyielding Sentinel, or if you have Nocturne Ring, you'll probably have enough fort. If you don't, you'll want the other one. I actually end up taking both of them because I have exactly enough points to take both of them. So I tend to go 38 Unyielding Sentinel. I drop, I don't know, I can't see exactly, it's a little blurry, but I drop, I think, 1 or 2 points out of AC, and yeah, I drop the shield AC out of Unyielding Sentinel and go for max out both of those. But basically, shield AC and the second one of these is entirely up to you. Whichever one you prefer more is what you go with.
All right, great. And then you mentioned that you have this standardized for 50 Reaper points, right?
Yeah, that's what I have right now. That's what I run.
So breakdown, are you spending all of those in Grim Barricade, or how are you breaking down the
Yep,
points?
all of them in Grim Barricade. So, Grim Barricade gives us 8 per point we spend, so we like it because that's a lot of HP. And then on top of that, it just has good boons, so we want that too. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to spend PRR up the entire left column. So all of the PRR. We only want 1 point in that tier 1 action boost because the tier 1 action boost isn't very good. So we don't care about it being not tier 1 very much, because we have enough saves to no-fail almost everything. The only thing that we don't have enough saves to no-fail is some reflex saves, which tend not to be either threatening or telegraph that we can action boost, so we don't really care about that one. So we only want it for the extra charge. All of the cores, obviously. The fourth core is extremely strong outside of Reaper because it gives you 100 extra HP, which is then scaled by your HP scaler to become 170 extra HP all the time. You really want that. Constitution up the right because Constitution is more HP. Um, and then we start taking Reflex because we need Reflex more than any other save. We have plenty of Fortitude because we have about 100 con and we're a Paladin, so we get an extra charm out on top of that, and that ends up being way more fort than we need. So then we want to max Reflex because Will tends not to be super relevant, and also we tend to have enough already. Um, in tier 5, we take Will in tier 5 instead because I tend to find that Reflex is enough already if I just put 9 into it before. And then we don't really care about dodge cap on this build because unfortunately the Reaper dodge cap does not increase your tower shield max dex bonus, so you don't actually get any extra dodge. So you really only care about those points of dodge for saving you a dodge augment, which sure, if you have the points for it, take your 6 or 7 dodge here and walk away without having to use a dodge augment. That's great. But you reach a point pretty quickly where there isn't anything that's super useful to spend points in. So once you hit around 50 reap points and you max that dodge out, that's pretty much all of the useful points. So then the one other big thing you want to grab is 3 points in the fortification action boost. And this is for one very specific circumstance, which is that the chipmunk and dryad will shred your fortification. And if the chipmunk and dryad shreds your fortification too much, you will die because the chipmunk and dryad on R1 crits for approximately 8,000 through my PR. That is a lot and you don't really want to get crit by that. Um, so the way we solve this is by action boost fortification to hit, I typically hit 471% fortification, which is enough to take 5 fort debuffs from the chipmunk before you get in danger zone. So it's just to solve that problem, which is convenient. Um, but other than that, your action boosts aren't super useful. So yeah, that's the priority I'd go about spending here. I think I don't spend in the Reaper charge or something to get it right now, but that's exactly how I would spend. Once I hit around 60 Reaper points, I'd probably consider branching out from Grim Barricade. The next tree is Melee Tree, I think, just to get an extra Reaper charge or two and get a little more whatever you want. Hit or damage if you think it's going to be relevant, otherwise go into Charisma, otherwise go into the Caster Tree with slightly less HP and more spell power and Charisma. But yeah, it's not a big deal as long as you max out those bonuses in the other Reaper tree. And you totally don't need this many Reaper points to run it. You actually don't need any Reaper points to run it. The Project Nemesis R5, this was without any Reaper points spent. But the version with Reaper points is obviously going to be better.
So I didn't slot gear on purpose. Without gear right now, just with this build, we're sitting at 4,300 hit points. So that's quite nice.
Yeah, yeah, that sounds about right.
All right, so
The PR should be pretty decent too. The PR display will be messed up because a lot of your PR and some of your HP is actually conditioned on wielding heavy armor or a shield. But once you get those on, you can check the PR, and the PR is pretty solid too.
So really quickly, just give me a high level overview of the gear. We'll fill out augments and everything before I post the build up in the Discord with this build file. But I want to save at least 10 minutes at the end for some extra tank tips and to answer any questions we might have in the chat. So real quick, can you walk me through your gear? Just walk me through each piece that you currently feel is the most optimal.
Yeah, so let's start with weapon because that one's really easy. Tanks don't want a lot from their weapon because you're not planning to do a lot of damage with it. So you kind of just want something useful. And it turns out there's exactly what two weapons with something useful on it in a very specific way, which is enhanced blood rage. Basically, you really want the shine set for a reason we'll get into later, which means that you don't get your necklace slot. So the only place to get enhanced blood rage is on your weapon. And enhanced blood rage is 8 extra constitution, which is 200 extra HP. So if you can take a weapon that'll give you 200 extra HP, you want to take a weapon that'll give you 200 extra HP. And it turns out there's a weapon, the Labyrinthine Edge, which gives you 200 extra HP, Vuln, which is a useful debuff, and Salt, which is by far the most useful crowd control effect on a weapon. So it's by far the best weapon in the game for tanks. Nothing really comes close. You just want Labyrinthine Edge because of Enhanced Blood Rage, and then it has very good affixes on everything else. Um, your shield is also fairly easy. Um, there are two effects on shields called Mirror Shield, and I forget what the physical one is called, which is funny because it's the one I run. I think Shield of Snow, maybe. Basically, while blocking, they give you 50 Insightful, PRR, or MRR. Whichever raid you're running, you want that one. So if you are running most content, you want the Legendary Bulwark of Snow, which gives you 50 Insightful PRR whenever you block. That's very strong. It's 33 extra PRR over what you get from your items, so you want it. Remember, thinking of HP as about 10 times your PRR, that's approximately 330 extra HP against physical damage whenever you hit block. You want it. So even if you're not running Winter Set, you still probably want it. In elemental damage heavy raids, you can swap to the lunar eclipse, which is the MRR shield from Tuat to handle. There's complicated swap gear sets in the dock that are probably better if you look at it in person, in text, because it's kind of complicated. Um, but yeah, basically, for most of the time, you're going to want to run that shield, the Bulwark of Snow. Then in terms of your main tank set, this is a little complicated, but basically, Shun still has the best tank set in the game because Shun comes with 10%, 15%, I believe it's 15% magical absorb. Sorry, it is 10%. That's the only place in the game where you get that bonus, and it's 10% less uh, elemental damage you take. You really want that because that turns out to be equivalent to approximately 30 MRR, and 30 MRR extra against elemental damage is very important. That's free 30 MRR. So because that's the only place in the game where you can get that bonus, you run that bonus. You can see the math and how this all breaks down in the doc too if you want. There are like 7 pages of math comparing it to LGS. That's probably not something I'm going to go over right now, but basically you want that 3-piece set. For the helmet, you kind of want Citadel's Gaze just for the free extra augment slot, but there's no real reason that you prefer it over the non-raid helmet. If you don't have the raid helm, you don't really care. So use whatever one you have better boosted. Yeah. The legendary version is the one you want, but yeah, same idea. So that's the armor, helm, and neck. None of those items are great in a vacuum. The neck is insightful physical sheltering. We're going to slot insightful sheltering anyway, so we don't really care, but it's sometimes relevant. The armor is decent. It comes with Fort and False Life and Pure. We actually overwrite a Pure later on, so it's not a big deal. It's basically just a 3-piece set for Artifact MRR, Artifact Pure, Artifact AC, Artifact Physical Absorb, and Artifact and yeah. The next thing we need to slot is figure out how we're going to get our 10% legendary bonus to HP. There are kind of two options for this. One is we can do the winter set. The winter set is solid. It's technically not optimal because it takes up more slots than is needed, but it's a very solid set. So the base gear set here, and the simplest gear set, is going to be using the Winter Nocturne Ring, Winter Shield, Winter Belt, and Winter Braces. So the advantage of that is that the Winter Belt comes with Insightful Sheltering, which is hard to get and very nice. The Nocturne Ring comes with Insightful Fortification, which is very solid, and also your ring slots are kind of unused. And the Winter Set comes with Artifact Heal Amp, which is very nice and something that's hard to get anywhere else. The Winter Set is pretty slot efficient. For 4 slots, it'll give you Artifact Heal Amp and Artifact 10% Legendary HP.
What was the last item again?
Belt or Bracers.
Bracers, gotcha.
Bracers will give you quality false life, which is hard to get elsewhere. The upgrade set, and I put upgrade in heavy quotes because it's not always an upgrade. It gets you an extra 114 HP at the cost of 30 heal amp and about 70 fortification. So it's only good if all you care about is avoiding being one-shot. Is a weird set involving an extra legendary bulwark set on augment and the mimic bracers. The reason why you use, the Mimic Belt, and a pair of heroic green steel bracers. The reason why this is technically an upgrade is because there are a whole bunch of flat bonuses that heroic green steel bracers give you. Specifically, it's a total of 45 stacking flat HP that you can't get anywhere else. So technically, slotting those gives you the best defensive stats. It's not something I would recommend doing unless you know exactly what you want to do with the build. I would just run the winter set because it requires farming out a full legendary bulwark set of set augments to gain like 100 HP at the cost of 30 heal amp. So I wouldn't do that in general. I would run with this winter set that I'm going to go over right now. The remaining things we'd really like to fill in here are an artifact. It turns out Dinobone artifacts are very strong. If you don't like using curse pots, you want the Hut of Sulamad because the hut comes with the benefit that you don't get cursed. I don't mind playing with curse pots. Some people really hate playing with curse pots. If you are using that, there's a swap set in the dock that Greg has linked that you can look at for how you can fit the hut in. Assuming you're fine not fitting the hut in, then you want to go for a dinosaur bone ring because that's an extra 8 heal amp, an extra 3 PR, and an extra 1 constitution over anything else, and also comes with a fourth filigree slot. The fourth filigree slot is very nice because it lets you fit better filigree in. Unsurprising. Basically an extra 2 con. So not going with the hut gives you an extra 3 con and some PR and heal amp in total. It's a nice bonus. That's enhanced ghostly, just because if you're not doing higher skull stuff, it's the best bonus you can put on it out of anything. 5% extra miss chance is good. Then once you do that, your trinket is going to be the emblem of elemental evil, which sounds stupid because you are a lawful good build equipping a taint of evil item. However, it gets you quality constitution and profane HP, and the taint of evil is only minus 5 HP. So you're pretty fine with it, because it's a very stat dense item that you don't care very much about the trade-off. And then with your remaining items, we get to one really important component of Paladin gear, which is that Paladins get religious lore feats every level. You may have noticed we haven't started quality sheltering yet. And the reason why not is because we're going to equip temperance items. So temperance items gives you +1 quality PRR or MRR per religious lore feat you have. We want that because that's a lot of quality PRR and MRR. There are two options. You could either run Collective Sight and Gloryborn Gloves, which give us very little we want, or you can run the Wisdom Goggles from Vecna and the legendary gloves of the Dark Six-Fingered gloves. Dark Six-Fingered gloves are a Dark Discorporation cookie, which is incredibly valuable because there's a button that makes you take 50% less damage for the next 20 seconds. It is not hard to see why a tank would want a button that makes them take 50% less damage for the next 20 seconds. The downside is you can't hit Intimidate during those 20 seconds or it will be cancelled. So you have to be a little creative with how you use it, but anytime when the party is not actively throwing aggro at you is a great time to use it. Yeah, it's that one. Um, the goggles also get you quality devotion, which is quite nice. But most importantly, this gives you the first two pieces of a Vecna set, which means that you can get 3 profane well-rounded and 30 profane PRR by just completing your Vecna set. And it turns out that there's a nice way to complete the Vecna set, which is a cloak with +7 insightful constitution, which is 1 more than anywhere else in the game. So completing the Vecna set rather than using just like a litany augment or something gets you a net +2 constitution. This is Blasphemous Regalia, I think. Blasphemous Regalia, I believe. Yeah, that one. Yeah. And then for the boots, Legendary Railworkers boots give you Insightful Constitution and fill out some absorbs. So they're a great, just natural choice to fill out the gear set. Yeah, and that's gear.
Excellent. And then, really quickly, can you walk us through your filigree setup?
Yeah, so the filigree setup is a little expensive on the full version of the spell. It tends to be expensive for tanks, and I've gone for a very expensive version. So this full filigree setup costs 6,700 threads, I want to say, which is pricey. If you don't want to run that version, there's another version that's significantly cheaper. But if you're willing to use a lot of threads, you have some threads burning a hole in your pocket. The optimal filigree setup is going to be 2 Nice Tools Raid Rare filigrees, one in the weapon, one in the artifact. Um, 2 Blood Feast Raid Rare filigrees, one in the weapon and one in the artifact. Um, 2 Grandfather's Shield and 2 Soul Weaver in the same configuration, both the raid rares. So you run all 8 rares that are super helpful for you. And then you run a Technomage 3-piece set, because Technomage 3-piece gets you +10 MRR and PRR, which is very good. And then you want to complete some sets. So you complete the Nice Tools set by adding 2 more Nice Tools filigree, and then you complete the Blood Feast set by adding a Blood Feast Con filigree. And yeah, for Technomage you go MR, PR, Con, because those are the tanky ones. It's straightforward there. Con filigrees tend to be better than PR or MR filigrees, slightly. They're very similar, but the con ones are a little better. And then yeah, Blood Feast and a second Nice Tools finishes you off. The nice thing about this is Blood Feast con rares are very easy to come by, and Technomage rares aren't too hard to come by, because both of those aren't like big DPS filigrees, so they're not super hard to get. The rares. The raid filigrees suck to get. That's just unfortunate. But you can replace them with more generic tanky sets or non-rare versions or a bunch of different things if you don't want to spend that many threads on them.
Yeah, but I'm thinking a lot of folks would be perfectly happy to have a tank that's effective in their raid party, so shouldn't have
Yeah.
too much trouble building a rep and getting those threads in.
No, yeah. It's easy. Tanks are the easiest characters to get threads on once you get started because it's not hard to find raid trades if you throw it up as a tank.
Awesome. So that walks us through a majority of the build that we'd see on paper here. I know there's still augments and some things that we're missing, but rather than get into that, um, since we have you here and you've obviously tanked a lot of end game content, a lot of higher content, and this builds no problem for R10 quests. You're pushing a lot of the raids throughout the game on Mid-Skull Reaper. So we're really talking about a very, very small percentage of the game. We're just talking high Reaper end game raids where this build would not might have some deficits to fill that tank role. So that's pretty amazing. What tips can you give us on how to play a tank better? And then the second part of that question would be, what are some must-have either items, whether it's something that uses UMD, scrolls, what are things that you should have on every tank?
Yeah, so just to quickly add on the gear, make sure you get the Artifact Con Raid Augment set. There are exactly 3 items without set affiliations, and that's intentional to make sure you have room to slot that set. So that's 3 extra Constitution. Make sure to slot it. In terms of tips on playing a tank, I think by far the biggest thing is movement. So if you watch a lot of very high-end tank players, better than I am, play emergencies, for instance, movement is by far like the biggest differentiator between really good tank players and decent tank players. So ideally in DDO, you don't want to get hit by things because that's the best way to tank is not get hit in the first place. Now, obviously, you want to do that while not making your DPS ineffective. So you want to make sure that the mobs aren't hitting your DPS and that your DPS is hitting the mobs. The big thing to watch out for at a base level in tanking is that a lot of things have frontal cleaves, so you want to make sure to stand opposite from where your DPS is standing. Some of these frontal cleaves are very big, like in Vision of Destruction, Sulamadi's has a very wide frontal cleave where you have to be about 180 degrees away to not get hit. Some of them are much smaller where it's a narrow arc cleave. In general, stand on the opposite side of the DPS is a good rule of thumb. Um, Beyond that, in questing especially, movement is really, really important because if you never want to get hit by everybody in a pack at once. So you want to ideally, for instance, jump over a pack, land on it, intimidate it, tumble out from under it so that as few things can hit you as once as possible. Once you get that sort of movement down, a lot of raids have more specific mechanics. So for instance, in Killing Time, there are a ton of mechanics that a lot of people don't notice about the raid. So for instance, you can dodge almost all of Korkaza's breath in Killing Time because she has wind-up animations. And once she starts her wind-up animation, once she gets past a certain frame, she no longer will reposition her breath to target you. So if you see a breath coming, wait a moment and dodge like under her left leg, if that kind of makes sense, you will likely avoid a lot of the breath from Korkaza, for instance. You can do similar things with shedding stacks in Killing Time, where if you reset Korkaza's animations when she's about to lightning strike you, she won't lightning strike you. She'll instead flip around and not reset your Killing Time stacks. So knowing raid specific mechanics is useful for stuff like that. More generally, like Greg was talking about, there are a lot of items that will be very useful for you as a tank. The most important one is one you already have equipped in this gear set. It's the Dark Discorporation gloves. This is 6 charges of 20 seconds of taking 50% less damage. Use those well. Adding the heroic gloves is a very useful swap to have because the only thing swapping the heroic gloves in loses you is the Vecna set. You still keep the temperance because the heroic gloves also have temperance and that when the level doesn't matter. So basically this means that you have a total of 4 minutes of Dark Discorporation. That's a great thing to use as long as you can plan around when to intimidate and when not to. Um, you can still self-heal, by the way, when you're Dark Discorped most of the time. The other scrolls you definitely want, or the other items you definitely want, are at least one epic or legendary ring of spell storing, because epic and legendary ring of spell storing both give you a bunch of charges of 400-ish spell points restored. Because on a paladin, you'll only have about 1,000 spell points. You'll want this, but also having these will give you so many more spell points than you know what to do with that you'll never really running out of spell points will cease to ever be an issue. Because with both rings, you have like a total of something a little over 4,000 effective spell points, which you will never ever burn on the Paladin. To self-heal islands in R4 and R5 KT, I've had to turn off combat expertise and spam my cure spells on cooldown. So literally every time one of my cure spells is off cooldown, hitting that cure spell, and even then I only went through about 2 to 3,000 spell points over the course of the raid. Admittedly, I got to Shrine for the middle period, but still, even if you're spamming on cooldown, you will never go through 2 spell storing rings on a paladin. So getting those rings is super important, but once you get those rings, you can stop worrying about spell points, no spell point pots or anything. Um, Other items that are useful is a Hood of Unrest, which is a 50% uncapped dodge clicky. It's a great thing to have because it means you get hit half the time for the next 20, 25, 20 seconds. You should have it. The other companion item to that is a Reveler's Regalia, which does the same, which is a clicky that gives at your target an additional 25% spell crit damage for the next 90 seconds. Now you might say this build has no spell crit chance, why do I want a Reveler's Regalia? And the reason is because you might not, but your healer does. So if you have a chance to pre-buff, you can buff your healer or your nuker with the Reveler's Regalia, swap back to your normal armor, engage the boss, and then for the first minute and a half or minute, they get a free extra spell crit buff and they can save their Reveler's Regalia for later on. Don't try and do this in combat because you do wear heavy armor, so you need like 10 or 15 seconds to do this swap. You can also hood other people, it's the same idea, it tends to be less useful, normally other people will hood you more than you hood other people. Um, you also want to carry a bunch of scrolls. So you want to carry a Greater Restoration scroll because it solves your negative level issues, which are relevant in a bunch of raids. You want to carry Fire Shield scrolls because they solve incoming fire and cold damage, which tend to be relevant in a lot of raids. If you're doing Killing Time, if you're doing Fires over Morgrave, if you're doing Skeletons, you definitely want Fire Shield. Resurrection scrolls for if you're ever low on spell points or if you're ever quelled, which is relevant in Project Nemesis because Rudis has an unblockable quell. If you are you can carry Tensor's Transformation because it's an extra 4 Constitution for the next minute, which is a solid bonus. Master's Touch scrolls are essential because this build actually does not carry Tower Shield proficiency. Um, so the way you get Tower Shield proficiency is a Master's Touch scroll. It doesn't actually matter that you don't carry Tower Shield proficiency because the only thing Tower Shield proficiency gets you is a 40% elemental deflection chance while blocking from shield deflection. But if you want that to work, you need to hit Master's Touch. They're very cheap, and you can carry them in stacks of several hundred. Just carry them around. You definitely want remove curse potions. Always carry at least 2 stacks of these and hotbar these so you can see when they're running out. If you don't have hurt, so you need them. Um, Spell power potions. So superior efficacy and superior odor are the 2 you want to carry for a total of 50 alchemical positive spell power, which is relevant if you're ever self-healing. You can hit about 600 positive spell power if you do a little bit of swapping and self-healing bursts. It's pretty solid. Yeah, like I said, you can self-heal islands on R4, R5, and KT if you do all of the swaps. Essence of Desire and Essence of Seduction are the 2 Yugoloth pots you'll want to carry for an extra 2 Constitution, flat 30 HP, and some Charisma. Very good. And then there are a lot of more rare cookies that you can't buy for plat. So things like Radiant Force Field pots, Fire Shield pots for when you can't afford to do the wind up of casting a scroll, Lasting Con or Well-Rounded pots, Deadly Weapons pots for other in your party because you actually have enough UMD to use Deadly Weapons. Those are rare scrolls, and nowadays more DPS is going to want to use a Magic Fang than Deadly Weapons, but it's something to be aware of. But yeah. These are the main items, I'd say.
That's great. That's a great list. One thing I would point out too, just to echo on the Hood of Unrest, that this is usable on yourself or a friend. So if you can coordinate an entire raid party to have this, it's an extra 50% uncapped dodge for almost 3 minutes. So that's pretty good.
Definitely, yeah. I also just realized I forgot Spell Absorb swaps. Spell Absorb swaps are incredibly valuable. You should be carrying them on all characters, but especially on a tank. Um, there are some raids where the best way of tanking is just eating every spell from the boss in spell absorb. So High Skull Baba or High Skull Shroud, sorry, High Skull Strahd are the two best examples. If you're Bride tanking or tanking Baba, you just want to eat every spell in spell absorb. Lord of Blades is the same because Lord of Blades will sometimes cast Ruin, which is on the order of like I forget exactly. It is far more untyped damage than your HP if you're doing it mid-skull or above. So there are some ways where you absolutely want spell absorb items. That's all of the normal ones, Crystalline Gauntlets, the cloaks, Mirror Cloak, the Jeweled Cloak, the Saltmarsh Trinket, which is an artifact, just a little harder to swap on, but still a good thing to have. All of those.
So if somebody's nervous about playing tanks, you've just showed us a build that works even as a first lifer. I think most people who raid on a regular basis are either doing, Reaper 1 or a lower setting, I would say, is their default setting. What advice would you give to somebody who's nervous about trying tank?
Sorry, I think you cut out for part of that. Could you say that again?
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, so this is a tank build that can work even as a first lifer. What advice do you have for somebody who may be thinking, yeah, I could try a first life tank, but they're nervous because a lot's going to depend on them when they're raiding, right? It's kind of a spotlight role. What advice would you give somebody who's nervous about trying out tank?
Yeah, I'd say the biggest thing is just starting out with Legendary Herd or Legendary Normal raids. Legendary Herd raids are really low pressure on a dedicated tank build. Like even if you have no Reaper points, just a Winter set and Shun set, say for gear, you will be significantly overstated for most Legendary Herd raids on this sort of build. So you have time to really think about what's going on in the raid, making sure you're controlling aggro, and a lot of raids with well-prepared parties are really just hitting Intimidate on the boss and standing there and blocking on lower difficulties. So make sure you've got that down. And once you've got that down, you can start thinking about the more complicated bits. But really, a lot of the most common raids you'll see in the LFMs or that people run as raid trains regularly, there's not a lot on you beyond standing in front of the boss, don't stand on the DPS, stand there and hit into him. So play a basic build, don't expect it to be perfect on the first try, and just get that down. And once you get that down, you can make it more complicated and push for harder difficulties as much as you want. Just getting that down is the most important bit. And it's not that hard. The biggest advantage you have is that you have a massive buffer of hit points and you are designed to not die. So in some ways it is more forgiving in terms of not dying and not having to be on the death timer in modern raids because like if you mess up, you will likely still be alive unless you're on Reaper, just because you have a lot of HP.
So in your opinion, what is the hardest raid or hardest content to tank in the game currently?
Uh, that's a good question. I mean, I think to me, the most impressive tanking jobs I've seen are still Ten Skellies, and I think they've gotten up to. I think Ugu got up to a 7 or a 8 too hard to handle recently. Those are both crazy. Skellies has enough damage incoming to almost one-shot you, even in mid-skull. The dots that you can get if trash isn't perfectly managed are incredibly nasty in Skellies. So pushing that to a 10, I think, is one of easily the most impressive, like, raw incoming damage tanking challenge I've seen. Um, there are a lot of other, for more, like, ordinary difficulty levels, Skellies is still probably the hardest way to tank. It's the one that'll take you probably the longest to feel comfortable tanking on O1. The other one that will be challenging to tank on O1 is Hunt, because for some reason, the Master of the Hunt has a 3k to 3.6k force damage rider on some of his attacks, which if you're less well started out on O1 will look like going from 5k or 5.5k HP to 0 HP in one swing for no reason. I don't understand exactly why Hunt is the only raid with this sudden jump in difficulty at O1 in terms of just raw force damage on some attacks. It's completely disproportionate from every other effect in there. that's just something to know and watch out for. In terms of things that like I've personally done that I think are challenging to do and hardest on this build, I think probably the raid that most consistently would catch me off guard is I don't know, probably it's Skelly's honestly, but I think other than Skelly's, VOD can be surprisingly tricky because there are a few phases where you have very little ability to do anything if you're chained by Sewell, but you still have a lot you have to do. So if you're chained while the second wave of Orthons spawn, uh, you will discover very quickly that all of your animations are slowed. So if you want to throw a shield to grab Orthon aggro, you are slowed while doing that. That will take you 6 seconds, which means that you have very limited ability to do things like pop defensive clickies. Anything that limits your ability to do things tends to be tough to tank, I think.
That's great. Just a quick stat review. Now that we have the gear on, now that we have our Reaper points spent, it's up over 6,000 hit points. We didn't slot Festive Con. We didn't fill out all the other augments. You're up to just about 500 PRR, 260 around MRR, over 300% fort. You got that 7 dodge. 191 heal amp. So, I mean, this is just solid. These are numbers I don't think most people would think you could achieve over 6,000 hit points on a first life tank build. So, I think what you've done here is amazing.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun to play. Like I said, once you get all the augments slotted with this configuration, I'd expect to be right up around 7,000 once like you pop your Yugo pots, you slot your festive con, you get all of that going and set up right. So yeah, really solid stats. It's fun to play.
Excellent. Well, Praetor, I just want to thank you again for hopping in, for being open and sharing your build with us. I think this is going to help a lot of folks, and I know at least message to my guildies is now you have no excuse. Everybody in the guild should have a tank. I think it's actually good if you rotate into the tank role. I think it gives you a different perspective on the raids you're running, and even if it's not a role you're going to play a lot or all the time, I think it's good to have that knowledge.
Yeah, it's definitely given me a much better perspective on mechanics in a lot of ways. Understanding what bosses do when, why the tank's yelling at me, all of that stuff.
Awesome. Well, once again, thank you so much for joining. That's going to do it for this episode of Fixer Upper. Let me just do a quick scan of the chat. I don't think I saw any big questions. If you do have a question, actually, I'll just pause. We got like 2 minutes left. See if we get any questions from the chat. Hey, Nacho. Hey, Dukin. Cozy said she's not streaming tonight, so don't have to swap off right on our deadline. That's okay. I think we did a good job covering this. Any questions from the chat? Is there a link for the build? Yeah, there is a link for the build, so I'll go ahead and I will share that again. And then I'm going to take this builder file once I have all the augments in it. I'll post this to the forums as well. It'll also be posted in the Discord, so if you want to download it, um, you can download that whenever you're ready. Upcoming streams, we are going to have Matrim on. I'm not sure if it'll be next week, but it looks like version 2 of the DDO Builder is very close to unveiling, and since we use that tool a lot on this show, I figured it'd be great to have Matrim on so he can show us all the new shiny things he built into version 2. Additionally, if you have any builds that you're thinking about considering, or a build that's not working and you'd like it to be fixed up, you can see our thread on the DDO forums. Just post an idea for a build there, and eventually we'll get around to making it here on the show. We did see the Wild Mage, Wild Magic class come out along with Eladrin. That's going to unlock a lot of new build possibilities, so expect to see some of that in in the next few weeks here as well. Other than that, Praetor, if people want to find you in game, where should they look for you?
Yeah, I'm on the Ergo server. You can find me there. I've been sporadically in and out of game actually for the last few months just because of some life stuff. But Ergo and probably at Cap, you most of my characters have names that start with Ali, ALY. So if you see somebody whose name starts with that, that's probably me. But yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions on the forums too in that thread. I'll probably see it. But yeah, thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, this is great. Thanks again, and I look forward to seeing all of your tanks in game. That'll do it for this week, and we'll catch you guys next week.